Welcome to Bankole's Nation. I'm your host, Bankole Thompson. Coming up on this week's episode of our podcast, we are looking at the new incoming administration of Detroit's new mayor, Mary Sheffield, and who is going to be the economic czar for the city of Detroit, who is going to be in charge of jobs in the economy at a time when poverty is sky high in Detroit and over half of the city's kids live in abject poverty. During a period when poverty itself is a form of violence against the people of Detroit. Thousands of families living under the mantra of what we call a perennial underclass. What will the Sheffield administration do in January 2026? What will the first 100 days look like? What will the first 12 months look like? It's all coming up right after the break. Stay with us. Welcome to Bankole's Nation. I'm your host, Bankole Thompson. Thank you so much for joining us on our periodic podcast here that comes to you, of course, looking at all issues that are in the public domain, issues that are of legitimate public interest. And of course, I want to thank all of you who have been with us since the start of this podcast, realizing how important it is to have an ecosystem of trusted voices that will address the issues that are important, issues that are of legitimate public interest, issues that are at the center of our economic and racial justice survival. And I think when we talk about survival in Detroit, we know what that is. In Black Michigan, we know what that is. And of course, around the nation, we know what that is. And I say Detroit has a new mayor, Mary Sheffield. The president, the outgoing president of the Detroit City Council, was elected in November as the new mayor of the city of Detroit. She's going to replace outgoing mayor Mike Duggan, who is running as an independent. And of course, it must be said with note that Mary Sheffield is the first woman to clinch the top job in the city of Detroit, and that is to be the CEO of the city. Mary Sheffield, 38 years old, Detroit's first female mayor, first Black woman mayor as well. And so in January, she'll be sworn in. A new administration called the Sheffield administration will take over the affairs of the city. And right now, as we speak, there's a transition going on between, of course, the incoming Sheffield administration and the outgoing administration of Mayor Mike Duggan. It remains unclear if any of Mike Duggan's top appointees will be retained by the incoming administration. And of course, Mayor Mike Duggan, back in 2014, became the first white mayor in the city's 40-year history. In 40 years, became the first white mayor in 40 years. Now he's running as an independent for governor of Michigan. He left the Democratic Party, and the political theory is that there was no way he could get the nomination. He left the Democratic Party, and now he's running as an independent. And of course, that's something that we will deal with at some point here on this podcast. But we are staying with the incoming administration. Now that Detroit has a mayor-elect in Mary Sheffield, what next? Comes the difficult assignment, the difficult job, and the complex operation of city government, and to be able to address the questions of inequality, the questions of affordability. These are issues that I have written about. These are issues that I have talked about over a long period of time. In fact, if you look at columns that are written in the dailies, perhaps I've written more columns on poverty in itself, where I've mentioned poverty, economic inequality, perhaps than anybody else in the mainstream media in Detroit. You can read my columns in the Detroit News on Mondays and Thursdays. What am I trying to say? What am I saying? Detroit is in the belly of the beast. Detroit is, in fact, the belly of the beast. The census report from 2024 indicated without equivocation that Detroit leads the nation when it comes to cities with a population of 500,000 or more. Detroit leads the nation when it comes to a population of cities with 500,000 or more. Detroit leads the nation on poverty. Detroit is the highest concentrated poverty city in the nation for a population of 500,000 or more. And the child poverty rate in Detroit is now over 50%. So that's a state of emergency. It's a state of economic emergency. So we find ourselves in a state of what I call economic mendacity, economic madness. Something has to give, something has to happen. During the campaign, Mayor-elect Sheffield talked about what she's going to do, extend the recovery to the neighborhoods. How that is going to be done remains to be seen. But these issues have to be tackled. The next 4 years are going to be critical in the future of the city of Detroit. And we're going to see what kinds of issues, she takes on. We're going to see if affordability will be front and center of this administration. Around the country, that's basically what people are talking about. It's difficult. Prices are going up, even in the grocery stores. Go to Kroger, supermarkets, you name it. And when we talk about the car buying industry, everything is going up and up. And in Detroit, you'll find families whose median income is $20,000 a year, $25,000 a year. What does that tell you? So many families who are below the poverty rate, the federal government's definition of a poverty rate. So there is a lot of economic struggle in Detroit, and I think sometimes we tend to miss that, right? And perhaps this election cast our attention, if you will, on the issue of poverty, something that we've talked about for a long time. In 2013, when Mayor Mike Duggan was running for office, was it in 2013? In 2017, when he was running for re-election, I remember hosting the only poverty town hall in Detroit, the only mayoral town hall on poverty in Detroit. It was held at Calvary Baptist Church near Martin Luther King Jr. Senior High School in downtown Detroit. Mayor Mike Duggan refused to attend. He was not at that town hall. His opponent, then State Senator Coleman Young, attended, who is now a member of the Detroit City Council. So we've been talking about this issue for a long time. In 2018, when we had the governor's race, when Gretchen Whitmer was running for governor, I moderated the only gubernatorial town hall on poverty in the city of Detroit, the only gubernatorial town hall on poverty for the Democratic race. Whitmer attended. The other candidates, Shuri Tanida, Abdul Al Sayed, and you name it, all of them attended at Martin Luther King Jr. Senior High School. It was at that town hall that Governor Gretchen Whitmer said publicly that if she was elected governor in 2018, that one of the first assignments she was going to do was to appoint a cabinet-level poverty czar. She said that at that public town hall. She got elected. She said, "I'm out, y'all." And she never went back on that promise. She reneged on her promise, which is what we've come to expect of politicians. They run for office and say one thing. They get in there and do something different. There are only a few politicians that we know of that live up to that expectations. That's why, of course, a lot of you don't trust politicians. It's a wait and see period, right? Mary Sheffield made a lot of promises. So once she's in there in January, then we'll see what she does. But the issue of poverty and economic inequality is not going to go away. It's here to stay. And these issues have to be addressed. They have to be addressed in a way that is substantial, in a way that doesn't convey some sort of a charity giving model. Somebody knows what I'm talking about. The foundations know what I'm talking about. I call it the helicopter approach. They show up at a community and drop a couple of dollars, then move to the next community, drop a couple of dollars, and then do a press conference and get a $10 million worth of publicity out of the press conference, and they expect that to solve the crisis of poverty. It doesn't go that way. I remember very well having conversations with some foundation leaders. And guess who it was? David Egner, the CEO of the Ralph Wilson Foundation, David Egner. And I was sitting in in the office of the then president of the Skillman Foundation, Carol Goss. We were sitting in Carol Goss' office, and Dave Egner was asking me questions about what do we do to help this community. Because at the time, David Egner was the head of the Detroit Economic Initiative, the NEI. And so Egner wanted to know. This white man wanted to know what to do to help Detroit, because we had this conversation and he talked about all these consultants that they have. And foundations are very prone to that. They like that. They hire a bunch of consultants, and basically their job is to come. Their job is to come and basically talk about Mark and Bewick when they don't know where Mark and Bewick is. They get paid a lot of money to talk about projects to bring on 6 Mile and Myers or 6 Mile and Schaefer without even knowing where that is. Because foundations do that. So there's a helicopter approach. And now that Mayor Sheffield is set to run the city with her administration, foundations are going to come to the table. What can we do? Because it's traditional. It's in the traditional mode for foundations to be in a league with the new administration. They have to be aligned with the agenda and the vision of the new administration. So what am I saying here is that that agenda and vision, whatever it is, has to be aligned with an anti-poverty strategy. You got to be able to address the perennial underclass that exists in Detroit. The ones that a lot of people don't give a damn about. Yeah. The perennial underclass reflected in the deaths of those two little kids who died in their mother's vehicle during winter. Because one, they were homeless, they had no place to stay. That's the cost of being a part of the perennial underclass. That's the cost of how expensive poverty is. It leads to death. It leads to death. And that's real. And so this new administration has to demonstrate that not only it has the capacity to address the question of economic injustice, but that it will, in fact, move with all deliberate speed to do so. Now, I'll tell you one thing I've noticed, that the first appointment that has been made, announced this week, and that is Brian White, who was a longtime chief of staff to the outgoing council president, now Mayor-elect Mary Sheffield. Brian has been announced as the new deputy mayor. That's the first appointment that has been made public by the transition team. That's a good move. I know Brian White. I've dealt with him throughout the entire period that he was working for Mary Sheffield. Brian is very respectful. He understands the role that the media plays, and he's very thoughtful in his responses. The many times that I've reached out to him, even when we don't see eye to eye on a number of issues, he's very respectful in how he conveys his disagreement with me. And he is not, when he was serving as chief of staff to the council president, he has not stonewalled information with me as it relates to issues that I was writing about during the last decade at City Hall. When I would ask for response from the council president's office, Brian would get me a response. And of course, I've known Brian before he even joined the council president's office. So Brian White is going to be the new deputy mayor for Mary Sheffield and a senior advisor. That's the first key appointment that's been made public. So we'll see what that is. But that comes with a lot of expectations, a lot of rigorous scrutiny, a lot of examination. A lot of spotlight because as deputy mayor, according to the transition team, he'll be in charge of state, federal, and regional support for the city of Detroit, all of which are very important. Detroit has to be able to relate to the state, no matter who becomes governor. Mayor Sheffield, Mayor-elect Sheffield has to deal with whoever is in Lansing, right? She's going to have to deal with President Donald Trump and his administration. She's going to have to deal with Oakland County, Macomb County, you name it, right? She's going to have to deal with the Great Lakes issue, the water, regional water board, you name it. There are lots of issues here, lots of balls up in the air, all of which are tied to economic justice, the quest for economic justice. But here's the other thing that you need to look out for, and this is something that I've talked about, and that is who's going to be the economic czar for the city of Detroit. Deputy Mayor has been announced to be in charge of state, local, and regional support. Well, who's going to have the economic portfolio to address the question of economic justice, to address the question of economic inequality, to address the question of affordability? Who's going to have that portfolio? It matters, jobs and the economy, because that individual will have to interface with billionaires, millionaires, and major investors who are looking to come to Detroit to make investments. In exchange, they want some tax breaks. You name it. You know how it goes. And I've covered City Hall long enough, Detroit long enough to understand how that tax break game goes. And I remember a long time ago covering when Marion Mahaffey was then president of the Detroit City Council. That was a long time ago when Reverend Joan Watson and Barbara Rose Collins and others were in that council. I remember covering City Hall, City Council meeting during that period. And, businesses, investors come to the table, they get tax breaks, they go back and they claim that they're going to create 500 jobs, and they come back after 3 years, the expiration of that tax break, whatever happens, they come back and say, oh, we were only able to create 40 jobs. We could not create 500 jobs because we can't find anybody who's qualified for these positions that we had available. I said hogwash. When a company wants to train people, they'll do what they can to train people. They'll put the resources in to train people and hire people. Hogwash. Some of those things are just technical excuses that they just give. And, when you get folks on city council who will not demand accountability, they're fine with it. They're okay with it. And so they shift the blame away from the investors, away from those who actually requested and are in receipt of those tax breaks. They shift the blame from them to the people. And hence, community benefits agreement. Do those agreements have any kind of enforcement mechanisms, right? These days, when you have community benefits agreement in Detroit, they parade a group of Negroes in support of different versions of community benefits agreements that really don't have any real substance. Sounds good, looks good, but has no real substance. We've seen that play out in Detroit. If you're familiar with the internal political workings of Detroit, you'll understand where I'm going with this. Community benefit agreements that sound good, look good, but have no substance, and cannot make the kind of economic impact that people are demanding. So whoever is appointed as the jobs and economy czar, or whoever has that portfolio, will have a lot to say in the Sheffield administration. So we have to watch for that, who that individual is going to be, because that individual is going to be front and center of this economic transformation that the Sheffield administration promises is going to take place. That individual will have to interface with the question of affordable housing, interface with investors, neighborhood development, you name it. All of the entire gamut of City Hall, of the agenda of the administration of the incoming mayor, will have to interface with whoever handles the portfolio of jobs and the economy. People want jobs so they can have a decent living, and they can put food on the table for their families. And some of the signals we have to watch out for is in the new year or in the first year of the administration, how many investors are coming in and how many economic development initiatives are being announced, and what that all means for the city of Detroit. Obviously, we know there is concentrated poverty. We also know that Detroit has a history, at least in the recovery under Mike Duggan. The economic oxygen had only operated in downtown, midtown, and Corktown, right? They're almost like the island of downtown, the island of midtown, and the island of Corktown. Most of the developments have come there. It was only later on that we started seeing them moving towards Mary Grove College, right? And in other areas across the city of Detroit. That is after people raised so much hell, right? After I've seen single mothers show up at City Hall, at town halls, talking about how they live in dilapidated homes, being kicked out by recalcitrant landlords. Recalcitrant landlords don't have anywhere to stay, right? Senior citizens getting priced out of apartments in downtown Detroit that historically they could afford. You know, probably we're paying like $600 to $700 a month, but now those apartments are charging like $2,800 a month. In fact, I remember going to a District Detroit meeting at Castech High School, where a couple of seniors were complaining to me about how they're getting priced out of Midtown because those senior apartments are being gentrified. It brings into question the affordability issue, economic injustice. So where do we put those seniors, right? They have a stake in the incoming administration. Does Detroit have a room for these senior citizens who are getting priced out of their apartments in the city of Detroit because of gentrification? Is there room in the inn of economic opportunity for these senior citizens who have given all to Detroit? Is there room in the inn of economic opportunity for these young kids who are the victims of poverty and economic injustice? Over 50% of Detroit kids live in poverty. That is a moral indictment, a remarkable indictment at that. You know, nobody can walk around here smiling and acting like, you know, it's all great and, you know, honky-dory here, this and that. No, that's a moral indictment. We're living in the age of shame. So I know all of these challenges are going to present themselves to the Sheffield administration. They have to find a way to address these issues. But at the center of all of these issues is jobs and the economy. Who's going to be in charge of bringing jobs? The individual that interfaces with the investors, the individual who will interface with the Chris Illiches and the Dan Gilberts, you name it. Somebody knows what I'm talking about. And I want you to pay attention to that position on jobs and the economy. And pay attention to who that individual would be. Because, you know, I've always said, not only on this podcast, but on previous shows that I've had, radio shows, I've always said that Black folk, you know, we got to learn to play chess, not checkers. We have to learn to play chess, not checkers. Pay attention to who gets the portfolio, the appointment of jobs and the economy. But that individual is dealing with dollars and cents, is dealing with the moolah, is dealing with money. Simple as that. I think I could not be more plain to you when I say that individual deals with the moolah, deals with the money, right? And so all of this, moving parts, we have to watch for it in the new year. And we have to see where this administration is going to take Detroit. And the signals will be clear within the first year. What happens the first 100 days? Are there any major economic development initiatives that will bring instant relief to the people of Detroit? I'm not saying PR-driven initiatives. I'm not saying PR-driven projects. Government is adept. It's an expert in rolling out PR-driven projects that have no meaning in the lives of the people, that have no bearing, that have no real impact. in uplifting or advancing the lives of many Detroit families who feel economically disenfranchised. So the first 100 days of the Sheffield administration will tell us where Detroit is going to be and what that looks like, and whether this administration can move, in the words of Brown v. Board of Education, with all deliberate speed to address the eternal question of economic injustice, to finally confront the poverty crisis that has so long been ignored. And in many ways, the way we see Detroit operates, Detroit leaders, elected officials, have been reactive. The only reason why poverty has been front and center in the last mayoral election is because the census report came out and said, hey, you're the largest poverty city in the nation when it comes to cities that have a population of 500,000 or more. The child poverty is over half of the city's population. Half of Detroit kids are mired in abject poverty. That is a reality. The census report says that. Now, if the census report said, well, you're the second largest poverty city, there'll be folks running around here trying to take credit, think that that's a good thing, thinking that that's a good thing when it's not. There's no real difference in being the number one poverty-stricken city and being the second poverty-stricken city. There's really no real difference. It's pretty much all the same. You're just moving by an inch. So there has to be a profound commitment to address the level of economic mendacity that Detroit finds itself in. There has to be a profound commitment from this incoming administration to address the issue of affordability. People are struggling. And that struggle could not be more pronounced than during the holiday. Somebody knows what I'm talking about, right? That's why you have different organizations, supporting families that are in need during this holiday, whether it is helping kids, have the necessary support, giving them gifts so they don't feel dejected, they don't feel abandoned, helping families who are struggling to make ends meet during this holiday. While some of us are online on Amazon or whatever it is, making all kinds of orders, there are families who barely ate this morning in Detroit. There are families who woke up this morning, told their kids, well, we don't have it. We're just going to ride this one out. So these are everyday economic challenges. And political leadership has to speak to these challenges, but also has to bring a measure of leadership to these issues, and must do so in a way that manifests itself that it is addressing the very core of poverty as a crisis, poverty as a violence upon the people of Detroit. So my message here, and I'll keep the main thing, I want you to pay attention as it relates to who is going to be the next economic czar for the city of Detroit, who's going to handle the economic policy of the Sheffield administration. That individual will have a lot of say. And so we're waiting with bated breath to see what that appointment looks like and who will be appointed to that position. Meanwhile, I'm going to ask you a favor. I want you to forward this podcast to everybody that you know that cares about the issue of economic inequality, affordability that we're facing right now in the nation, economic injustice. Forward this podcast to them. Ask them to share it with their friends, share it with people in their circle, family members, you name it. Even share it with politicians. Say, hey, Bankole talking about y'all. This is what Bankole say, that this is what needs to happen in 2026. Share it. Even with the Sheffield transition team. And put a note on there. Bankole just talked about the economic czar. Who are you all planning appointing to be in charge of jobs in the economy? Bankole just raised the issue. So we are watching. Share it with them. Share it with the Sheffield transition. Share it with everybody who's concerned about inequality in the city of Detroit and beyond. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Bankole Thompson, and we'll be back with more episodes.